Thanks for tuning in to another Natural Resourceful video. This video is an interview I did over 3 years ago when I came up with Naturally Resourceful Podcast for Productions. This interview was a big learning experience and there were a lot of technical difficulties. And, over the past 3 years, I've been carrying around my equipment in a suitcase. So learning how to set up and get everything right and dial it all in. This particular interview had some issues, but I think cleaned it up. I think we have a pretty good piece of content. I hope you guys enjoyed as much as I enjoyed shooting it. Yeah, I'm already taking up too much of your time. Special thanks to Kristian Knutson for helping me pull this interview off. And of course, thank you to Mattew for putting yourself out there for a student and sitting down and talk to us. All right, cool. And yeah, like and subscribe. Thanks, guys. All right, here we go. Welcome to Natural Resourceful Productions. My name is Jake Durham. Today I'm joined by Matt Orr. He is a BA in biology from Amherst College and a PhD in population biology from the University of California, Davis. Welcome, Matt Orr.
Thanks, Jake.
So thanks for coming in today. It must be pretty hard to fit this into your schedule.
I have a busy schedule, but it's fun to come in and have a chance to do something different.
Yeah, and here at Natural Resourceful Productions, we're just trying to give a platform to different scientists and researchers in our community and try to highlight the things that they want to do and just give them a platform to come and speak openly. The stuff that I've seen you do is in relation to population biology, where it's been applied to a lot of different sectors of the natural resources.
Yeah, I've got kind of a winding road type of a history in terms of the kinds of things I've done and the projects I've been involved in. And, I usually just try to work on what seems interesting, and a lot of things seem interesting. So,
have you been able to look back and connect the dots on what got you here?
I think one thing I always tell my kids, and then I'll also give my students feedback on if I think they're doing a good job of it, is try to get yourself into a career position where you're doing something that you like to do. You're eager to go to work and your job doesn't seem quite so much just like grunt work. And I can go back to when I was probably around 7 or so, maybe a little older, and I went out and started a butterfly collection living in Southern California. My whole neighborhood at the time, I had a bunch of friends that lived very close by. I lived in a neighborhood that was full of college professors at UCSD, and we created this kind of whole gang of kids that, rather than going around and making mischief, we were going around on our bikes with our butterfly nets, collecting butterflies. And so I think, being a biologist, and I've done a lot of different stuff, but I've spent a fair amount of time studying insects, kind of just evolved out of never really being lucky enough, I suppose, to never really have to go and earn that money right in the moment and have a chance to work my way through school and pursue other academic opportunities.
So you kind of knew the direction that you were going to be heading at a very early age.
Well, I don't think I really saw collecting butterflies as a career direction at the time. But I think I also could say I didn't really ever feel like I had a clear career direction. I just kept doing stuff, and then it evolved into a career. I went to graduate school because I really liked the professor that I worked with as an undergraduate. He just got me interested in biology, thinking about animal behavior, and that got me to grad school. And then the work that I did in grad school kind of got me into my postdoc. And then actually some family situation stuff took over. We had, my wife and I had a son, and we were living in the Bay Area, and it wasn't really the greatest place to try to have both a family and a career. We were both kind of feeling that way, and we came to Bend. But I got involved in ecological restoration up here in Bend, and even that was something that I'd started as a hobby in the Bay Area. My wife and I would go down and do volunteer work in ecological restoration at a place called Fort Funston, which was a converted military base that they were restoring. So really all along the way, it's been kind of opportunistically trying to just do what I like to do. And I guess I've been lucky enough, at least to this point, to be able to just keep that going.
So would you say that you kind of stumbled into one thing after another? Something would come up and you're like, oh man, maybe I could do that.
I think that's probably kind of fair to say. And you know, it sounds, in some ways it sounds kind of idealistic. Like that's great that somebody would be able to just keep doing what they want to do. On the other hand, there is a stressful side to it, which is I never really knew where I was headed. I would say even like all the way through grad school and maybe even my postdoc, I still didn't know what my like long-term career was going to look like. And so, you know, there's a downside to that too, I suppose. But I wouldn't go back and do it differently. I think I was probably more lucky and just in terms of being able to have the resources as I went along, where I was never forced to just like suddenly have to take a job just to make money. And so I guess I'd characterize my situation more as kind of just like lucky, fortunate. I would say too, though, like that at each step along the way, being able to at least be successful at each one of those steps kind of helped me to get to the next step. As an undergraduate, being able to work with a professor and do a good job working with that professor helped me to get into graduate school. And then once I was in graduate school, one of the things that got me to my postdoc was working on a project down in Costa Rica where we were looking at these little tiny parasitic flies that lay their eggs into the heads of leafcutter ants. I got started on that on just a summer field course for graduate students and got a little bit of interesting data out of that and got a really small grant to just be able to go back and finish working on that project. And basically what we discovered was that these tiny little flies derive the foraging cycles of the ant. These ants occur in really large colonies with multiple nest entrances, and they're a really conspicuous feature of any tropical forest in, say, Central or South America. So people have wondered for a long time, why do the leafcutter ants, sometimes their colonies are really active during the daytime. Other times they're out there foraging at night, and what these ants do is they cut leaves and they bring them back to their colony, and they go out in the thousands to do this. And so when you see a ribbon of ants walking through the forest floor where they've cleared the entire path for themselves, like you can see their trails even when they're not on them, it's a pretty conspicuous thing to see. And so it's easy to notice that, oh, they were active at night last month, but now they're out during the day. And nobody had really figured it out, but it turned out these little flies were what are driving it. When the flies are around, the ants won't come out of their colony. Mm-hmm. And when the flies are gone, the ants will, and the flies are only active during the day. And I was able to manipulate the presence of the flies by using a lantern. And so if you can keep the flies around, then the ants start coming out. They think it's nighttime. They think they're going to be safe, but the flies have artificial light. Oh. It was kind of like a night game, right? Like stadium lighting for the flies. And they've got probably on the order of tens to hundreds of eggs that they could be putting into these ants. Yeah. And so as soon as the ants start to get attacked, they start releasing alarm pheromones. And so the effect kind of multiplies upwards through the communication signals of the ants. That leafcutter ant project led to my postdoc, which was working on the same system of flies with fire ants, which are an invasive species worldwide. And they're a really big ecological menace. And so it went from being just kind of a project of interest of like, look at this cool behavior, to something that might actually be practical in terms of controlling fire ants. And I worked on a postdoc on that for about 4 or 5 years. And then once I had all that wealth of experience, it was really helpful to be able to be a little bit more mobile and come up to Bend.
Something that I've kind of noticed in your population biology was very interesting, where you look at how you applied it with ants, and then you also applied it to stomach biome, looking at stomach biome as a population.
So that's a whole new kind of frontier in science. It's sort of like, I think I was just saying this, one of my students here, Laura Childers, she just graduated from the OSU Cascades campus about 2 years ago, and she now has a full ride PhD scholarship at Duke University. and she's actually working on the microbiome.
Really?
So she just emailed me the other day, and she's working on looking at microbiome manipulations in these genetically engineered lines of mice and trying to tie it in with Parkinson's disease. I emailed her the other day. I was like, everybody used to think of space, outer space, as the final frontier, but we're finding out now that inner space is really the final frontier. Because people have thought about space for a long time, but we haven't thought as much as we should have about what's going on inside of our bodies. And for a long time, sort of the paradigm, well, this is after microbes were discovered. Generally speaking, microbes within the human body were thought of as being pathogenic. And it's really only very recently that we've figured out that many of the microbes in our body are highly mutualistic, and we're very dependent on them for our health and well-being. Some people have coined this term holobiont, so that we're more than just like you are more than just you. You are you plus your microbes. And in truth, 90% of the cells in your body are microbial cells, and 99% of the genes in your body are microbial genes. And so it's really, all this new information is courtesy of gene sequencing, because that's what really makes it possible to sort of assay the diversity of microbes that occur inside the human gut. Prior to that, it was very hard to study them. Most of them are anaerobic. You can't plate them up and study them using traditional methods in a lab. But if you can literally just take a sample of, a poop sample, and then sequence up all the genes in it, and basically understand or at least an index of all the taxonomic diversity that's inside somebody's gut. And so the combination of there being these populations of bacteria inside of us, and then them having these interactive effects with that system around them, kind of has people thinking about the human body more as like an ecosystem than as an individual. People have can get very some highly pathogenic species in their gut, and those are very difficult to treat. And so when that happens, one alternative to trying to treat it with antibiotics is to just simply try to inject the microbiome of somebody else's gut into that person. And so there's ways of taking a healthy person's stool and then basically purifying it down to the microbial community and giving it to the other person. And so, and it is purified down. So for instance, one way of being administered that microbiome is actually through a drip that goes through your nose. In the US, it's only approved for certain certain indications. Like you can do it for Clostridium difficile, which is a really bad, highly toxic microbe. But it's not widely approved. I think, I'm almost sure, I would say probably that at some point it will be approved for a much wider variety of things. Your gut is connected to your brain via the vagus nerve. And so we know there are, say, microbial metabolites that stimulate that nerve, and then that nerve goes to your brain. And so there's basically a direct line of communication between what you think of as you, that is your brain, and whatever's going on down in your gut. I mean, there's clear ties between the gut microbiome and a lot of different sort of behavioral disorders, so depression. And that's part of the reason why my ex-student's working on possible links between the microbiome and Parkinson's disease. It's very widespread. It's linked to immunity. It's linked to cancer. It's certainly linked to a wide variety of gut disorders. I got interested in the problem because I had a really severe gut disorder that arose, if we go back to the ants, it wasn't really the ants' fault, but it kind of was. I spent a lot of time down in Brazil studying the fire ants, and we stayed at a lot of remote locations. And in those locations, I was just eating a lot of stuff that wouldn't be considered sanitary in the U.S. or really anywhere, I suppose, even in Brazil, but I was still eating it. Yeah, so we were in this region called the Pantanal, which is the largest tropical wetland in the world. And the first time I went down there, the base was basically just drawing water out of the river and, making our meals, washing our vegetables and stuff. They did end up installing a well, which I think probably made things a lot better. But the river was, it was full of wild animals. There were capybara, which are the largest rodents in the world. They're just right there, right in front of the base. They just hang out on the bank. And then there were human communities also squatted on the river. So probably squatted in both senses of the word. And so, it's just easy to pick up pathogens. There's the higher diversity of animals in the tropics, I think, is very well matched by the higher diversity of pathogenic challenges when you're down there. I mean, especially for somebody who hasn't grown up there. And so I was constantly having gut issues, and those just kept getting worse the more that Western medicine treated me with antibiotics. And so I got to the point where I really had to figure out something about my health that was a non-Western approach to thinking about it. And then that got me just interested in pulling together everything I'd worked in restoration ecology, which is my main focus of research now, and what I knew about biology, and trying to think about, my gut as a disturbed ecosystem, and what do you do to help disturbed ecosystems to recover. So that's what led to kind of writing up a paper. My wife is a physician. She was a co-author on the paper, and another student from OSU Cascades was a co-author on that paper. Well, another thing that they've figured out is that there's this whole thing called the hygiene hypothesis, which is that we aren't challenging our immune system with enough microbes, that as our immune systems are developing as children, they're not getting challenged enough. There's a study that showed that people that grew up on farms don't have as many allergies, and basically being around animals more and being in a more kind of a sort of an indoor-outdoor type of an environment. But what I was getting at, so the fecal microbiota transplants sound like one very out there approach, but becoming increasingly mainstream. And then another approach is giving people parasitic worms, and letting people's intestinal tract become colonized by parasitic worms. And those apparently have some sort of, maybe in their own defense, they have a way of quelling your immune system. And so people with what are being diagnosed as autoimmune disorders, there's good data out there showing that some of these cases can be resolved if you literally just cultivate a few pet worms in your gut. The worms shed eggs, but they don't reproduce themselves in your gut, so you can control the number that you get colonized by. You're talking about an autoimmune disorder of the gut. The last I've heard, that people may have figured this out better since then, but the latest that I'd heard was that these pathogens have their own self-interest at heart. Over human evolutionary time, these things have lived inside of us, and there's been this what biologists would call an evolutionary arms race, or sort of a back and forth between the host and the pathogen. And to the extent that our immune systems have tried to get rid of them, they've figured out ways to get around that and quell our immune system. And so that's it. Is they're just basically in there ratcheting down your immune system. But then that can have actually a beneficial effect if you have an autoimmune disorder.
Mm-hmm. And so an autoimmune disorder is basically your immune system turning on you, right? Or why would you need to quell your own immune system?
Yeah, well, I hesitate to say too much about that because I am not a doctor, but I will say the paper that I wrote does have a physician as a co-author. Mm-hmm. And a lot of these things that are being diagnosed as so-called autoimmune disorders, some of them may be legitimately write down that descriptive diagnosis, something where your body has turned on itself for whatever reason. I tend to think that there's evidence out there that a lot of them are something other than that. And I think probably more specifically what they are for a lot of these, and I'm not saying all of them, I think there's a quite a wide number of mechanistic problems that can go wrong with your body, and quite a lot of things that can go wrong with your gut. And they tend to get lumped under when Western medicine can't really diagnose something, they tend to lump it under things. And so, you're having problems with your gut, or you've got an autoimmune disorder.
Yeah.
For lack of a better diagnosis, they can't think of what is wrong. And so they say, well, it must be autoimmune because we can't find any other reason why this would be happening. But I think there's increasingly good evidence that people can develop these kinds of problems simply through what they eat. So there is good data out there showing that if you don't eat a diet that is full of what are called microbiota accessible carbohydrates, these are things that your gut pathogens can digest. And actually, you don't even have the digestive enzymes to break a lot of these substances down. They're common in sort of what you consider to be whole foods. But if you have a diet that's deficient in those microbiota accessible carbohydrates, then your gut microbes that are used to eating those will, in a sense, turn on you, and they will begin to eat the mucosal lining of your gut.
Really?
And that's probably for them, that's sort of that's an alternative food source for them, and maybe in lean times, maybe that's how that evolved. But for whatever reason, that's not good. And this is also well documented. It's not good for your gut lining. So it produces something called leaky gut. And at that point, things that are in your intestines can get into your bloodstream that wouldn't otherwise get into your bloodstream.